He bought the most beautiful black woman at the auction, and the next day she was his wife. Sold to the mountain man for $300. The auctioneer's gavel crashes down as dusty hands lift the trembling girl from the platform. The crowd sneers at her fate. Another broken soul destined for servitude in some remote cabin, her intelligence dismissed, her dignity trampled. They assume she'll scrub floors and bear children until her spirit dies. But the bearded stranger who claimed her carries secrets deeper than his weathered scars. His calloused fingers hold documents that could shatter the corrupt foundations of this town. Yet success depends entirely on an impossible partnership. Their union threatens to expose a conspiracy that reaches the highest levels of power, but only if she possesses the hidden strength he desperately hopes lies beneath her fragile exterior. Will she become his greatest ally, or his final victim? Before we continue, comment where you are tuning in from. Perhaps we will publish a story there. The morning sun cast long shadows across Millbrook County's town square as crowds gathered for the monthly auction. Wooden platforms stood ready. Chains rattled. The scent of sweat and fear hung thick in the humid air. Serafina Bell stood with practiced composure on the auction block. Her eyes moved methodically across the gathering crowd. She memorized faces. She counted the coins in each bidder's purse. She calculated their desperation levels. Years of silent observation had taught her to read people like books. Judge Cornelius Blackwood adjusted his black robes and surveyed the proceedings with satisfaction. His cold eyes lingered on Serafina with obvious appraisal. He whispered something to his assistant that made both men chuckle darkly. Margaret Whitmore led a cluster of society women near the front. Their parasols bobbed as they exchanged cruel assessments. They discussed Serafina's worth like merchants evaluating livestock. Their voices carried deliberate cruelty. The crowd grew restless. Rough-handed landowners pushed forward. They examined their potential purchases with calculating stares. One man flexed his whip handle. Another spoke loudly about breaking stubborn spirits. Reverend Isaiah Stone stood at the crowd's edge. His weathered face showed visible discomfort. He clutched his worn Bible tighter with each cruel comment. His presence offered the only hint of moral conscience in the gathering. The auctioneer stepped forward. His voice boomed across the square as he began the degrading ritual. He forced Serafina to display her hands. He made her walk in circles. He commented on her teeth like she was a horse for sale. Serafina endured each humiliation with quiet dignity. Inside, she catalogued every detail. She noted which families attended. She observed who seemed uncomfortable. She memorized the judge's whispered instructions to certain bidders. The bidding started aggressively. Landowners shouted numbers with increasing fervor. They discussed their intended uses for her without shame. Some spoke of fieldwork. Others mentioned domestic duties. A few made implications that made Reverend Stone look away. Judge Blackwood made pointed comments about discipline and obedience. His words carried thinly veiled threats. Several bidders nodded in understanding. The message was clear. Resistance would not be tolerated. Dust clouds announced a late arrival. Horse hooves thundered across the packed earth. The crowd turned to see a lone rider approaching fast. His weathered coat flapped in the wind. His face remained hidden beneath a wide-brimmed hat. Tobias Crane dismounted with fluid grace. The townspeople recognized him immediately. Whispers spread through the crowd like wildfire. The reclusive mountain man rarely ventured into town. His presence here seemed unusual. His timing appeared deliberate. Most knew his tragic story. His wife had died years ago under mysterious circumstances. Some whispered about slavery's cruelties. Others spoke of forced separation. All agreed the loss had broken something inside him. Tobias moved through the crowd with quiet authority. His eyes found Serafina immediately. Something passed between them. A moment of mutual recognition. Two souls who had suffered understanding each other instantly. He studied the proceedings with military precision. His gaze lingered on Judge Blackwood's satisfied expression. He noted the crude comments from potential buyers. His jaw tightened with barely controlled anger. The auctioneer continued his degrading performance. He seemed to enjoy the crowd's cruel entertainment. He encouraged louder bids. He promised satisfaction to the winning buyer. Tobias stepped forward. His voice cut through the noise like a blade. He placed his first bid. The amount surprised everyone. It exceeded the current offer by a significant margin. The aggressive landowners turned their attention to this unexpected competition. They increased their bids with renewed determination. They clearly resented this outsider's interference. Their comments grew more explicit and threatening. Tobias remained unmoved by their intimidation. He countered each bid with calm precision. His military pension provided substantial resources. His determination appeared absolute. Serafina watched this unexpected development with careful interest. She studied Tobias's face for clues about his intentions. His eyes held something different from the other bidders. There was respect where others showed only ownership desires. The bidding war intensified. Numbers climbed higher than anyone anticipated. The crowd grew excited by the unexpected drama. Margaret Whitmore's group speculated loudly about the mountain man's motivations. Judge Blackwood's expression shifted from satisfaction to concern. This outcome hadn't been part of his plan. He clearly preferred one of his usual associates to win. His whispered urgings to certain bidders became more obvious. Tobias noticed the judge's interference. His eyes narrowed with understanding. Some corruption was at play here. The auction was being manipulated. Justice was being perverted for personal gain. The final moments arrived with electric tension. Only 2 bidders remained active. The crude landowner made one last, desperate offer. The crowd held its collective breath. Tobias stepped forward with quiet confidence. His final bid shocked everyone into silence. The amount exceeded anything previously heard at these auctions. It represented a fortune by local standards. The auctioneer's gavel fell with thunderous finality. Tobias had won. The crowd erupted in surprised murmurs. Margaret Whitmore's group exchanged scandalous whispers. Judge Blackwood's face darkened with obvious displeasure. Tobias approached Serafina with respectful caution. He offered her his coat for warmth and dignity. She accepted with grateful acknowledgement. Their eyes met again with deeper understanding. Judge Blackwood stepped forward with threatening authority. He made pointed comments about discipline and knowing one's place. His words carried clear warnings about stepping outside social boundaries. The crowd began to disperse with excited chatter. Everyone speculated about the mountain man's intentions. Most assumed he wanted Serafina as a replacement wife or servant. None imagined the truth that would soon unfold. Serafina's fate now rested entirely in mysterious hands. The mountain trail wound upward through dense pine forests. Tobias rode ahead on his stallion, while Serafina followed on the mare he had provided. The silence between them felt different from the oppressive quiet of the auction. This carried possibility rather than dread. Serafina studied her unexpected savior with careful observation. His shoulders held the rigid posture of military training. His weathered hands guided the reins with practiced gentleness. Something about his manner suggested respect rather than ownership. The afternoon sun filtered through towering branches. Birds called from hidden perches. The sounds of civilization faded behind them with each mile traveled. Serafina felt an unfamiliar sensation growing in her chest. Hope. Tobias finally broke the silence. He asked about her education. The question caught her completely off guard. Most masters never cared about their property's intellectual capabilities. They preferred ignorance to knowledge. Serafina hesitated before answering. Revealing her literacy had brought punishment in the past, but something in Tobias's tone encouraged honesty. She admitted she could read and write fluently. His response surprised her further. Interest replaced skepticism. He pulled out folded papers from his saddlebag, legal documents covered in official seals and complex language. He asked for her opinion on property boundaries. Serafina examined the papers with growing amazement. These were land deeds and territorial maps. She recognized several locations from her years in the county. Her photographic memory allowed her to spot inconsistencies immediately. She pointed out discrepancies in the boundary descriptions. Certain parcels seemed to overlap impossibly. Some signatures appeared suspiciously similar despite different supposed owners. The dates on several documents created logical contradictions. Tobias listened with intense focus. His questions revealed deep concern about corruption in local property transfers. He suspected systematic fraud, but lacked the detailed knowledge to prove it. Serafina's observations confirmed his worst fears. The trail opened into a mountain clearing. A modest log cabin sat, surrounded by pristine wilderness. Smoke curled from the stone chimney. Gardens showed careful tending. The property radiated peace and self-sufficiency. Tobias helped Serafina dismount with careful courtesy. He showed her inside without the possessive authority she expected. The cabin's interior reflected a man of simple tastes but genuine refinement. Books lined wooden shelves. Maps covered one entire wall. Evening shadows lengthened as they shared a simple meal. Tobias finally revealed his true intentions. His proposal shocked Serafina into stunned silence. Marriage as equals, partnership rather than ownership, freedom through legal protection. The story of his first wife emerged in painful fragments. Sarah had been torn from her family by slavery's cruelties. Their brief happiness had ended when creditors seized her as payment for debts. She died in captivity before Tobias could secure her release. His military pension now funded a personal mission. He bought and freed enslaved people whenever possible. The marriages provided legal protection under current laws. Previous partnerships had helped 3 women reach family members in free territories. Serafina listened with growing amazement. This man offered something she had never dared imagine. True partnership, mutual respect, the chance to fight injustice rather than simply endure it. She revealed her own secret in response. Years of careful documentation filled hidden journals. Her photographic memory had recorded countless conversations about legal proceedings. She possessed detailed knowledge of corruption throughout the county. Tobias examined her hidden records with increasing excitement. Names, dates, property descriptions, and witness accounts filled page after page. Her beautiful handwriting documented systematic fraud spanning decades. This evidence could topple the entire corrupt network. Her documentation skills had developed from necessity. As house property, she had access to private conversations between powerful men. They discussed illegal activities openly, assuming she lacked the intelligence to understand their significance. She had memorized every detail while pretending ignorance. Court proceedings, backdoor deals, forged signatures, and intimidation tactics. Her invisible presence had made her the perfect witness to systematic corruption. The partnership they could form excited both minds. His military connections provided access to federal oversight. Her evidence offered comprehensive proof of local crimes. Together, they could expose the network that had destroyed so many families. Serafina accepted his marriage proposal with clear understanding. This was an alliance for justice rather than romantic love. Both carried scars from slavery's cruelties. Both sought to prevent others from suffering similar fates. They spent the evening planning their first investigation. The property documents Tobias had shown earlier contained familiar names from Serafina's records. Judge Blackwood appeared in multiple suspicious transactions, A pattern of systematic theft was emerging. Their target became clear. Blackwood had been forging documents to steal property from vulnerable families. He targeted both enslaved and free families who lacked legal knowledge. The stolen land was then sold to his associates at enormous profits. The scope of the conspiracy grew as they compared their evidence. Dozens of families had lost their homes to fraudulent legal proceedings. The corrupt network included court officials, local businessmen, and even some religious leaders. Their marriage would provide the legal standing necessary to challenge these crimes. As husband and wife, they could present evidence in federal court. Tobias's military service granted access to territorial authorities beyond local corruption, but success would require perfect execution. Judge Blackwood commanded significant power throughout the county. His network included dangerous men willing to use violence against threats. Discovery of their investigation could result in imprisonment, or worse. Serafina understood the risks completely. Her freedom and life depended on exposing this corruption before it destroyed them. Blackwood would not hesitate to forge documents claiming she was stolen property. Her re-enslavement would eliminate the primary witness against him. The stakes could not be higher for either partner. The church bells chimed softly as Serafina and Tobias approached the wooden chapel. Reverend Stone waited at the entrance with nervous determination. His decision to perform the ceremony had cost him support from influential parishioners. His moral conviction outweighed social pressure. A small group of supporters gathered inside the modest sanctuary. Poor farming families who respected Tobias's military service. A few freed people who understood the ceremony's deeper significance. Their presence provided courage against the hostility waiting outside. Margaret Whitmore led a crowd of protesters beyond the church doors. Their angry voices carried through the morning air. Signs denounced the Union as an abomination. Their fury reflected deep fear of changing social orders. Judge Blackwood positioned himself prominently among the protesters. His official robes lent authority to their cause. He questioned the ceremony's legality loudly enough for everyone to hear. His words carried clear threats about future legal challenges. Reverend Stone began the service with trembling hands. His voice grew stronger with each sacred word. He emphasized the spiritual equality of all souls before God. His sermon challenged the crowd's prejudices directly. Serafina wore a simple white dress provided by sympathetic churchwomen. Her dignity transformed the modest garment into something regal. She repeated her vows with clear conviction. Her voice carried strength that surprised even herself. Tobias spoke his promises with military precision. Each word carried the weight of genuine commitment. He placed a simple gold band on her finger with reverent care. Their partnership was now legally protected under territorial law. The ceremony concluded despite the growing protest outside. Reverend Stone pronounced them husband and wife with defiant joy. The small congregation applauded their courage. A new chapter had begun for both partners. The reception took place in the church basement, away from hostile crowds. Serafina moved carefully among the guests. She listened to their conversations with her trained ear for detail. Every story revealed another piece of the corruption puzzle. The farmer Thomas spoke about losing his homestead to sudden debt claims. The papers had appeared overnight, demanding immediate payment. Judge Blackwood had overseen the foreclosure proceedings personally. The land was sold the same day to unknown buyers. Widow Mary described similar circumstances surrounding her late husband's property. Forged documents claimed he owed massive sums to creditors she had never heard of. The judge had refused to allow time for investigation. Her family home was seized within days. Serafina's memory cataloged each testimony with photographic precision. The pattern became undeniably clear. Blackwood was systematically targeting vulnerable families with fraudulent legal claims. The stolen properties generated enormous profits for his criminal network. She began connecting names from her hidden journals to the stories she heard. The same witnesses appeared at multiple fraudulent proceedings. The same buyers acquired property at impossibly low prices. The same legal technicalities were used repeatedly. The conspiracy's scope exceeded even their worst fears. Dozens of families had lost everything to Blackwood's schemes. Both freed and enslaved people were targeted equally. Anyone lacking sophisticated legal knowledge became potential victims. Outside the church, tensions escalated throughout the afternoon. Margaret Whitmore's protesters grew bolder with each passing hour. They demanded the ceremony be declared invalid. Their chants grew increasingly threatening. Judge Blackwood stepped forward as their unofficial spokesman. He declared the marriage legally questionable under current territorial statutes. His authority intimidated many who might otherwise support the couple. His words carried the force of official power. Anonymous threats began appearing around the church grounds. Crude messages warned of consequences for supporting the union. Several sympathetic families left early out of fear. The intimidation campaign was achieving its intended effect. Tobias and Serafina departed quietly through the church's rear exit. They traveled home along mountain paths to avoid confrontation. The protesters' angry voices followed them long into the evening. Their enemies had revealed themselves completely. The following days brought systematic social ostracism. Local merchants refused to serve the couple. Former military associates avoided Tobias entirely. Even basic necessities became difficult to obtain through normal channels. Margaret Whitmore organized a comprehensive boycott campaign. She pressured businesses to deny service to the controversial couple. Her social influence proved remarkably effective throughout the community. Economic warfare replaced direct confrontation. Judge Blackwood escalated his legal assault with calculated precision. He filed formal challenges questioning the marriage's validity. His court documents cited obscure territorial regulations about property rights. He claimed Serafina lacked legal standing to enter contracts. The property deed to their mountain cabin came under immediate scrutiny. Blackwood's court orders froze their assets pending investigation. He claimed irregularities in the original land grant required federal review. Their home's ownership suddenly became questionable. Serafina recognized the familiar pattern from her documented cases. Blackwood was using identical tactics against them that he had employed against previous victims. The irony was not lost on either partner. They were experiencing firsthand the corruption they sought to expose. During quiet evenings, Serafina continued her secret investigations. She interviewed affected families who visited under cover of darkness. Each testimony added crucial details to her growing evidence file. The conspiracy's full scope emerged gradually. Her documentation revealed systematic coordination between court officials, local businessmen, and territorial administrators. Forged documents, intimidated witnesses, and rushed proceedings characterized every fraudulent case. The same signatures appeared across dozens of suspicious transactions. The stakes became personal when anonymous warnings appeared at their cabin. Crude messages threatened violence if they continued their unusual marriage. Someone was monitoring their activities closely. Their investigation had attracted dangerous attention. Serafina discovered their own property deed contained the suspicious alterations she had learned to recognize. Blackwood was preparing to seize their land using his proven fraudulent methods. Without legal standing, she could face re-enslavement as stolen property. Time was running out for both partners. The church basement became their secret headquarters after midnight meetings began. Reverend Stone provided sanctuary, despite mounting pressure from his congregation. Candles flickered against stone walls as affected families gathered in desperate silence. Serafina spread her documentation across wooden tables. Maps, copied deeds, and witness testimonies covered every available surface. Her photographic memory guided families through the complex web of corruption that had destroyed their lives. The farmer Thomas brought his foreclosure papers for examination. Serafina immediately spotted the forged signature techniques she had learned to recognize. The ink appeared fresher than the document's supposed age. The handwriting matched samples from other fraudulent cases. Widow Mary contributed her husband's original property deed for comparison. The differences between legitimate and fraudulent documents became starkly apparent. Serafina taught the group to identify suspicious alterations, rushed dates, and irregular witness signatures. Tobias used his military connections to obtain original territorial land grants from federal archives. These authentic documents proved that many seized properties had never legally belonged to Blackwood's supposed creditors. The thefts were becoming undeniably documented. Each family's story revealed identical patterns of systematic fraud. Sudden debt claims from unknown creditors, rushed legal proceedings without proper notification, immediate property sales to the same mysterious buyers. Judge Blackwood's personal oversight of every case. The network's scope expanded beyond their worst fears. Serafina's records identified over 40 families who had lost property through identical fraudulent methods. The stolen land generated massive profits for the criminal conspiracy. Both freed and enslaved families were targeted with equal ruthlessness. Blackwood's network showed no discrimination in selecting victims. Anyone lacking sophisticated legal knowledge became potential prey for their schemes. Serafina began teaching basic legal literacy during these secret gatherings. She showed families how to recognize authentic documents versus clever forgeries. Her lessons provided tools for protecting against future fraud attempts. The group discovered that several supposed creditors were entirely fictional entities. Business names appeared on legal documents but possessed no actual existence. The same fake companies were used repeatedly across multiple fraudulent cases. Tobias's military records proved that some seized properties had been granted to veterans as legitimate compensation for federal service. These thefts constituted federal crimes beyond local jurisdiction. Higher authorities would be forced to investigate such violations. Reverend Stone provided moral authority that legitimized their resistance movement. His participation convinced hesitant families that fighting corruption aligned with Christian duty. Religious justification overcame fears about challenging established power. The evidence file grew substantially with each midnight meeting. Serafina's meticulous documentation created an unshakable foundation for legal action. Names, dates, witnesses, and physical evidence formed a comprehensive case against the entire network. Meanwhile, Judge Blackwood's suspicions grew more dangerous daily. His spies reported unusual activity around the church basement. Late-night visitors aroused his paranoia about organized resistance. He began planning preemptive strikes against potential threats. Economic retaliation intensified against families supporting the investigation. Merchants who sold goods to known participants faced boycotts from influential customers. Employment opportunities disappeared for men associated with the resistance movement. Margaret Whitmore's social campaign expanded beyond the controversial marriage. She targeted anyone who questioned established authority structures. Her influence reached into businesses, churches, and social organizations throughout the county. Several families withdrew from the investigation under mounting pressure. Fear of economic ruin overcame their desire for justice. The network's intimidation tactics proved remarkably effective against vulnerable people. Serafina recognized the urgent need for federal intervention. Local corruption ran too deep for territorial authorities to address effectively. Only outside oversight could break the criminal network's stranglehold on justice. Tobias arranged contact with federal territorial administrators through his military connections. These officials possessed authority that transcended local court jurisdiction. They could investigate crimes involving federal land grants and veterans' benefits. The preparation phase required absolute secrecy from Blackwood's surveillance network. Evidence had to be copied and hidden in multiple locations. Witnesses needed protection from retaliation before testifying. Timing would determine success or catastrophic failure. Serafina created duplicate copies of all crucial documents using her precise handwriting skills. These backups were hidden in various locations throughout the county. No single raid could destroy their comprehensive evidence collection. The group identified federal crimes that demanded outside investigation: forged veterans' documents, fraudulent territorial land grants, and interstate property sales created jurisdictional requirements beyond local authority. Higher courts would be compelled to act. Judge Blackwood accelerated his legal assault against Serafina and Tobias. New court filings questioned their property ownership more aggressively. He scheduled hearings designed to seize their assets before federal authorities could intervene. Anonymous threats escalated from warnings to specific violence promises. Someone left threatening messages at their cabin daily. The intimidation campaign revealed growing desperation among the criminal network's leadership. Serafina discovered surveillance watchers positioned near their mountain home. Men with no apparent business in the area observed their movements constantly. Blackwood was preparing for decisive action against their investigation. The final meeting brought together all participating families for comprehensive testimony preparation. Each person practiced describing their experiences clearly and accurately. Serafina coached them on answering hostile questions from defense attorneys. Reverend Stone agreed to serve as moral witness for their federal complaint. His respected position in the community would lend credibility to their accusations. Religious authority could overcome skepticism about their motives. The evidence compilation was nearly complete. Over 100 pages of documentation supported their case against systematic corruption. Witness testimonies corroborated every major accusation with specific details. Federal authorities agreed to conduct preliminary hearings about territorial land fraud. Tobias's military service provided access to officials who could authorize comprehensive investigations. Justice seemed within reach, but Blackwood was preparing his own preemptive strike against their efforts. The courthouse overflowed with spectators on the morning of the federal hearing. Families from across 3 counties had traveled to witness this unprecedented challenge to established authority. The wooden benches creaked under the weight of desperate hope. Federal Territorial Judge Harrison presided over proceedings that would determine the fate of dozens of families. His appointment from Washington carried authority beyond local political influence. Judge Blackwood sat at the defendant's table with visible confidence. Serafina entered the courtroom carrying only a modest leather satchel. Her simple dress and humble demeanor suggested someone unprepared for sophisticated legal battle. Whispers spread about the mountain woman who dared challenge the county's most powerful figure. Margaret Whitmore's supporters filled the gallery's front section. Their presence was designed to intimidate witnesses and demonstrate community support for traditional authority. Their disapproving stares followed every movement of the controversial couple. Tobias took his seat beside his wife with military bearing. His weathered hands rested calmly on the table surface. Years of combat had taught him to remain steady under pressure. His confidence provided strength for nervous allies. Judge Blackwood's attorney presented their opening statement with polished arrogance. He dismissed the accusations as desperate attempts by troublemakers to avoid legitimate debt obligations. His words carried the authority of established legal precedent. The defense strategy became immediately clear. They would portray Serafina and her supporters as ungrateful recipients of generous legal accommodations. Any documentation problems resulted from clerical errors rather than deliberate fraud. Federal Judge Harrison called for the prosecution's opening evidence. All eyes turned toward Serafina as she rose from her chair. The courtroom expected a fumbling presentation from someone clearly out of her depth. Serafina opened her leather satchel with deliberate precision. Inside lay not amateur scribbles but professionally organized legal documentation. Her first surprise was the quality of evidence preparation that rivaled trained attorneys. She began with a simple property deed that everyone recognized as legitimate. Her clear voice explained authentic document characteristics that established baseline standards. The audience followed her logical presentation with growing interest. Then came the systematic revelation that stunned the packed courtroom. Serafina produced over 50 fraudulent documents that violated every authentication standard she had just described. Each forgery was more obvious than the last. Her photographic memory allowed precise testimony about dates, witnesses, and circumstances surrounding each fraudulent transaction. She recited conversations word for word that implicated multiple conspirators. Her accuracy was mathematically impossible to fake. The pattern emerged with devastating clarity. Identical handwriting appeared across supposed different creditors. The same witnesses signed documents on dates when they were provably elsewhere. Fictional businesses appeared repeatedly as legitimate entities. Judge Blackwood's confident expression cracked as the evidence mounted relentlessly. His attorney objected repeatedly, but could not challenge the documentation's authenticity. Federal oversight had provided verification beyond local manipulation. Tobias presented military records that proved several seized properties had been federal grants to legitimate veterans. These thefts constituted federal crimes that demanded prosecution regardless of local politics. Washington authorities were legally obligated to act. Serafina's years of invisible observation provided devastating insider knowledge. She testified about private conversations between conspirators that revealed deliberate criminal intent. Her servant status had made her the perfect, unnoticed witness. The systematic targeting of vulnerable families became undeniably documented. Both freed and enslaved people had lost property through identical fraudulent methods. Economic status mattered more than race in selecting victims. Widow Mary took the witness stand with trembling courage. Her testimony corroborated Serafina's documentation perfectly. The same forged signatures had stolen her family's generational home. Her tears moved even skeptical observers. Farmer Thomas described losing his veteran's land grant through rushed proceedings that violated federal territorial regulations. Judge Blackwood had personally overseen the illegal seizure. Military service meant nothing against systematic corruption. Reverend Stone provided moral authority that legitimized the resistance movement. His testimony about community destruction carried weight beyond legal technicalities. Religious leadership demanded justice for systematic oppression. The defense crumbled as witness after witness corroborated identical patterns of fraud. Judge Blackwood's attorney could not explain why the same irregularities appeared in every challenged case. Coincidence became statistically impossible. Margaret Whitmore's supporters began shifting uncomfortably as the evidence mounted. Several recognized their own property transactions among the suspicious documents. Self-interest began overriding social prejudice. Federal Judge Harrison examined the original territorial land grants that Tobias had obtained through military channels. These authentic documents proved that many seized properties had never belonged to claimed creditors. The thefts were federally documented. The revelation that shocked everyone came when Serafina revealed the conspiracy's financial scope. Over $200,000 in property had been stolen through systematic fraud. The network had operated for nearly 2 decades. Judge Blackwood's desperate attorney attempted character assassination against the key witnesses. He questioned Serafina's right to testify, given her recent enslaved status. This strategy backfired when Federal Judge Harrison ruled on constitutional grounds. The systematic nature of the corruption became the prosecution's strongest argument. Individual errors might be explained as mistakes. Identical patterns across dozens of cases proved deliberate criminal enterprise. Serafina's final revelation stunned the courtroom into absolute silence. She produced evidence that their own property deed contained the same fraudulent alterations found in every other case. They were simultaneously victims and prosecutors. The conspiracy had targeted them specifically because their investigation threatened the entire criminal network. Judge Blackwood had planned to seize their property and re-enslave Serafina as stolen goods. The personal stakes were life and freedom. Federal Judge Harrison called for closing arguments as afternoon shadows lengthened. The evidence presented exceeded anything in territorial legal history. Systematic corruption demanded systematic justice. The verdict would determine whether justice existed beyond local political influence. Federal Judge Harrison's gavel echoed through the packed courtroom with thunderous finality. His verdict rang clear across 3 counties. Judge Cornelius Blackwood was stripped of all authority and would face federal prosecution for systematic fraud. Justice had prevailed over corruption. The conspiracy's financial empire crumbled within hours of the ruling. Federal marshals seized forged documents, fraudulent account records, and stolen property deeds. 2 decades of criminal enterprise collapsed under the weight of irrefutable evidence. Every fraudulent property transfer was immediately reversed by federal order. Families who had lost their homes through illegal seizures regained their rightful ownership. The restoration process began before sunset on the day of judgment. Judge Blackwood himself was led from the courthouse in federal custody. His face showed the hollow shock of absolute defeat. The man who had wielded corrupt power over countless lives now faced years in territorial prison. Margaret Whitmore approached Serafina outside the courthouse with unprecedented humility. Her public apology acknowledged the wisdom and courage she had initially failed to recognize. Social prejudice gave way to genuine respect for accomplished justice. The community transformation began immediately as families returned to properties stolen through systematic fraud. Neighbor helped neighbor rebuild what corruption had destroyed. Economic cooperation replaced the fear that had divided them for years. Reverend Stone was appointed interim territorial judge pending proper federal elections. His moral authority and community respect made him the obvious choice for restoring legitimate legal proceedings. Religious principles would guide judicial decisions. Serafina's documentation skills became legendary throughout the territorial legal system. Federal authorities requested her assistance with corruption investigations in neighboring counties. Her photographic memory and analytical abilities were officially recognized. The literacy program she established grew rapidly as families understood the importance of legal education. Adults and children attended evening classes in the church basement. Knowledge became the community's best defense against future fraud. 6 months after the trial, integrated classrooms operated throughout Millbrook County. Both freed and enslaved families sent their children to learn reading, writing, and legal document recognition. Education transcended previous social barriers. Serafina stood before her largest class yet on a crisp autumn morning. 40 students ranging from age 6 to 60 filled the expanded classroom. Their eager faces reflected hope that knowledge would protect their futures. She taught them to identify authentic signatures versus clever forgeries. Property deed examination became a practical skill that every family member could master. Legal literacy spread like beneficial wildfire through previously vulnerable communities. Tobias managed the complex process of property restoration with military precision. His organizational skills helped families navigate federal bureaucracy efficiently. Former victims became empowered property owners with clear legal standing. Their marriage had evolved into something neither partner initially expected. Mutual respect had grown into genuine affection through shared struggle. Their partnership demonstrated that equality created stronger bonds than traditional submission. The mountain cabin became a gathering place for families seeking legal advice and educational opportunities. Serafina's reputation for wisdom and fairness attracted visitors from distant counties. Their home radiated hospitality and learning. Federal authorities established permanent oversight of territorial land transactions. New regulations required multiple authentication steps for property transfers. Systematic fraud became virtually impossible under enhanced scrutiny. Other couples throughout the territory were inspired by Serafina and Tobias's example of equal partnership. Traditional marriage arrangements began evolving toward mutual respect and shared decision-making. Social progress followed legal victory. The auction block where Serafina's journey began was transformed into a monument celebrating dignity and resistance. Bronze plaques honored all families who had suffered under systematic oppression. Memory served education and prevention. Margaret Whitmore became an unexpected ally in promoting educational opportunities for previously excluded families. Her social influence now supported integration rather than segregation. Former enemies discovered common ground in justice. Serafina's story spread to neighboring counties through traveling merchants and federal officials. Other communities began organizing their own resistance movements against local corruption. Justice became contagious across territorial boundaries. The network of families they had helped formed a mutual support system that strengthened the entire region. Economic cooperation and shared resources created prosperity that benefited everyone. Unity replaced division. Evening found Serafina reviewing lesson plans for the next day's classes, while Tobias organized property restoration documents. Their quiet domestic partnership had become the foundation for community transformation. Personal change had created social revolution. Letters arrived regularly from other territories requesting assistance with similar corruption investigations. Serafina's reputation as a legal educator and fraud expert extended far beyond county boundaries. Her influence continued growing. The former Judge Blackwood's network associates faced their own federal prosecutions as the investigation expanded. Corruption that had seemed impenetrable was systematically dismantled through persistent legal pressure. Justice proved stronger than conspiracy. A year after the trial, Millbrook County had become a model for territorial development. Federal authorities cited their educational programs and economic cooperation as examples for other regions. Progress attracted positive attention from Washington. Serafina's final lesson of the day focused on constitutional rights and federal protections. Her students learned that law could serve justice when citizens possessed knowledge and courage. Education remained their strongest defense. As autumn darkness settled over the mountain valley, Serafina and Tobias reflected on their unexpected journey from auction block to educational leadership. Their partnership had transformed not only their own lives, but an entire community's future. The trembling girl who once stood powerless before cruel bidders had become a respected leader whose influence reached across territorial boundaries. Dignity and knowledge had triumphed over systematic oppression through persistent courage. Their story proved that true partnership could overcome any injustice when founded on mutual respect and shared purpose. Love had indeed become a path to freedom for themselves and countless others whose lives they touched. The mountain cabin's windows glowed warmly in the darkness, beacon of hope for all who sought education, justice, and the transformative power of human dignity.